Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a look at lesson 4. So go ahead and get your book open to page 117. And we're going to be looking at percents greater than 100% and percents that are less than 1%. So percents that are over 100 and percents that are less than 1%. So I want you to go ahead and turn to this next page. And before we get started, I had a friend of mine, Mrs. Paul. You might know her. She taught me this little thing, and it is called DP. So like Dr. Pepper, but not Dr. Pepper, really decimal and percent. And she showed me this little trick, and she said when you go from a decimal to a percent, you move it to the right 2 times, right? When you go from a percent to a decimal, you move the decimal 2 places to the left. So here, it's kind of like a little circle. So this is going to help us because sometimes we get ourselves a little bit confused when we are dealing with percents greater than 100 and percents less than 1. So taking a look at this, just remember DP, Dr. Pepper, but really decimal and percent. And to go from a decimal to a percent, we're going to move it 2 places to the right. And when we go from a percent to a decimal, we're going to move it 2 places to the left. So it's kind of like a little circle. So keep your eye on this, star it, circle it, write it down, put it in your notes. It'll be really good for you to have something to hang on to as we go through this. So we're going to keep that there as we work through this example of number 1. It says, write 0 and 0.2% as a decimal. So when I do my DP, okay, this is 2 places to the right. Going from a percent to a decimal means that I'm going 2 places to the left. So here's my percent. I'm going from a percent to a decimal, which means I'm going to move it 2 places to the left. 1, 2. And I have my decimal point in. So now when I read this, there's my tenths, my hundredths, and my thousandths. I get 2 thousandths. And when I simplify that, I get 1/500th. So I've already written my decimal form of 0 and 2 thousandths, and then I simplified it into 1/500th. Okay? So that is a percent that is less than 1% because 0.2% is less than 1 whole. Let's take a look at this next one. I'm going to write my DP over on the side, as should you. Decimal, 2%, my Dr. Pepper. When I go this way, from decimal to percent, I go 2 places to the right. When I go from percent to decimal, I go 2 places to the left. So take a look. I have 170%. Well, I know that my decimal is at the end. I'm going from a percent to a decimal, which means I'm going to move this 2 places to the left. And I get 1 and 70/100ths, or I get 1 and 7/10. That's how it looks like as a decimal. So now let's turn that into a fraction. 1 and 7/10. Okay, let's go ahead and practice on these right down here. Let me zoom in a little bit. So 0 and 25/100ths. So I'm going to do my DP. From my decimal to my percent, I move it over 2 to the left, or to the right, I'm sorry, and then my percent to my decimal, I go to the left. So I'm going from a percent to a decimal. So here I have, this right now is a percent. Since I'm going from a percent to a decimal, I'm going to move it 2 places to the left, which gives me 0 and 25/10,000ths. So there's my decimal, 0 and 25/10,000ths, and now I'm going to write it as a fraction. Whoops. 25/10,000ths, and I know that the greatest common factor of both of these is 25. Yep, it's acting all crazy again. Is 25, which gives me 1/400. So 1/400th is the same as 0 and 25/10,000ths and 0.25%. Okay, let's take a look at 3,000%. So 3,000%. When I look at 3,000%, I know my decimal point is at the end. So I'm going to move it 2 places to the left. 1, 2. Okay, so I get 3 for my decimal, and I have nothing after, so you can leave it as 3 or you can write in the other zeros. It doesn't matter. It's the exact same number. So when I have 3 and I need to write that as a fraction, well, any whole number over 1 is that whole number. So it would be 3 over 1, or you could just leave it as 3. Alrighty? Okay, let's take a look at 530%. So let's remember my DP. Be writing this down as many times as I write it down. From a decimal to a percent means we go 2 to the right. From a percent to a decimal means we go 2 to the left. So I have 530. My decimal point is at the end. I'm at a percent. So I'm going from a percent to a decimal, which means I'm going to move it 2 places to the left to get my decimal. So I get 5 and 3/10. So it looks just like 5 and 3/10 is exactly how we write it. 5 and 3/10. Now, 3/10 cannot be simplified anymore because 3 and 10 do not have a common factor. So those are going to just stay as they are. It's just going to stay 5 and 3/10. Okay. Let's take a look at this problem right here, D. It says the stock price for a corporation increased by 0.11%, or, as we would say, it is 0 and 11/100%. Write 0 and 11/100% as a decimal and as a fraction. So again, let's make a little note. DP, Dr. Pepper, but decimal percent, we're going to, if I go from a decimal to a percent, I move 2 to the left. If I go from a percent to a decimal, I go 2 to the right. If I go from a percent to a decimal, 2 to the left. All right, so I have a percent, and I'm going to a decimal, which means I'm going to be moving this 2 places to the left. 1, 2. And so now I end up getting 0.0011. And when I write that, that gives me 11 over 10,000, because this is 0, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. So 0 and 11/10,000ths. So there's my decimal, and there is my percent. Okay. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to actually practice this. So I want you to skip this page because we're going to come back to it. Skip this page. And we're going to jump to numbers 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to do these together. So I'm going to write my little DP note up here with my arrows. Okay. And I'm going to write a 2, although I'm running out of room. All right, so 325%. We are going to write these percents as a fraction and as a decimal. And my fraction always has to be in simplest form. So 325%. I know that my decimal point is right at the end of the 5. So knowing that I'm going from a percent to a decimal, I'm going to look at my picture up here. From a percent to a decimal tells me that I'm going to move this 2 places to the left, which gives me 3 and 25/100. Now, that's the first part. The next part is we're going to take that, whoops, I don't know what just happened there, there we go. We're going to take that and we are going to now write that as a fraction. So notice I have 3 whole, and then I have 25 over 100. Well, I know that that can be simplified by dividing each of these by 25, which is going to give me 3 and 1/4. It's going to give me 3 and 1/4. Okay, let's do 440%. 480%, but I'm going to go ahead and move that one kind of up here. So 480%. Again, I'm going from a percent to a decimal, which means my decimal point's at the end. I'm going to move it 2 places to the left, which now this equals 4 and 8/10. I can drop that 0 or I can leave that 0 on, but for the sake of simplifying, I'm just going to drop that 0 at the end. So 4 and 8/10. So I'm going to write that exactly how I say it, 4 and 8/10. Now, knowing that these share a common factor of 2, I'm going to simplify and get, I'm running out of room over here, 4, 8 divided by 2 is 4, 10 divided by 2 is 5. So I get 4 and 4/5. All right, let's take a look at another one. 0 and 6/10%. So here I am at 0 and 6/10%. I'm going again from a percent to a decimal, which means I'm going to move it 2 places to the left. 1, 2. I'm going to annex a 0, and I'm left with 0.006, and I'm going to look at my tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So I know that this is 6 thousandths, so I'm going to write 6 thousandths, and when I look at this, I know since they are both even, I'm going to divide by 2, which is going to give me 3 500ths. Okay. All right, so here's what we're going to do. This is part 1 of the video where we just looked at how we go from percents as decimals and fractions, and we did these practices right here. Okay, so I'm going to stop. We're going to create a part. There's going to be the part 2. So take a break, get your book ready and your mind ready, turn to this page so you're ready to go for the second part.